queridas e amadas variantes e metas, Igor presente! No programa de hoje vamos estar apresentando a 5ª edição da nossa série. Espero que esteja com o suco do lado, pois haverá tempo somente de se sentar num sofá e apertar os cintos. Estamos saindo por hora e você, você mesmo, está na Comics Games agora!
Em 1962, Stan Lee e Jack Kirby criam outro personagem na Era Atômica, o Hulk.
Of course, in those days there were so many movies with nuclear blasts creating monsters and giant things and so forth. So I said there was a gamma ray explosion and he got caught in it and it transformed him.
O Hulk era um personagem que sofria uma morfose no início dos anos 60, e essa era justamente a época em que as pessoas tinham medo dessas mesmas armas atômicas que viessem a fugir do controle. Ao tentar salvar um adolescente que invadiu uma base de testes que estava acontecendo com os raios gama, a bomba que tinha sido criada pelo próprio cientista Bruce Banner se tornava um dispositivo que agora o está vitimizando.
Banner's dark side just sort of, metamorphosizing into flesh and blood, green flesh and blood, of course, but there it was.
Mesmo trabalhando para o governo, em sua transformação, o mesmo exército que o tinha contratado agora tentava matá-lo.
Even while the Vietnam War was going on, the Hulk's most persistent adversary was the U.S. Army. The Comics Code said that, you couldn't show the Army as villains. And yet at the same time, Marvel was basically making them to be the bad guys. They're able to do this simply by saying the Army is trying to do what it thinks is best. It just happens to be a little misinformed in this case.
The Hulk looked like a menace. He looked like a monster.
There's nobody else who understood him except the teenager whose life he saved, Rick Jones. The teenager understands, but the world doesn't understand.
Personagens como Hulk estavam em sintonia com a nova geração de leitores que cresciam questionando as autoridades.
Here's this character, but when he loses his cool, he becomes this green monster, and he goes on tirades, and he just starts smashing things up. What better metaphor, could you have for angry youth?
We started to get fan mail, and the postmarks suddenly weren't from kindergartens, but they were from high schools, and then later from colleges.
Se tinham mais leitores jovens, Stan imaginava e pensava que talvez esses leitores gostassem de um personagem principal que fosse adolescente. O chefe de Stan não estava tão certo.
You say that he's a teenager? A hero can only be an adult. Teenagers are sidekicks. And you say you want him to have problems. Stan, don't you know what a hero is?
It's interesting that in the 1930s, you had the country seemingly falling apart, and yet you had these superheroes come in that were totally confident in their ability to resolve these problems. And then in the Kennedy years, the early 60s, things seemed to be fairly stable, and yet you had the Marvel superheroes come in who were vulnerable and confused and disoriented. The difference was the baby boomers. They were notoriously self-absorbed. All this was magnified in popular culture geared towards youth. James Dean, for example, he may look tough on the outside, but his heart is breaking and he wants to be accepted and he's unsure and his parents don't understand him, the world doesn't understand him.
Peter Parker era um tímido estudante que tinha uma grande aptidão por ciências. Ele vivia com seu casal de tios, Ben e May Parker. Quando picado por uma aranha radioativa, Peter ganhava poderes de aranha. Ele mesmo não se considerava um lutador contra o crime. Ele queria mesmo era ser um astro de programa de televisão, mas quando ele se viu em ter que parar um bandido, ele não queria se envolver. Esse mesmo bandido mata o seu tio Ben. Então Peter Parker tinha aprendido que com grandes poderes viriam grandes responsabilidades.
People ask me where I came up with the line, with great power must also come great responsibility. And I have no idea.
O editor Martin Goodman teve pouca fé na ideia, tanto que a primeira aparição de Spider-Man foi na última revista de ficção científica da qual tinha falhado. Isso foi no verão de 1962. Então, neste momento agora, Goodman passa a visualizar os lucros.
He said, "You know, Stan, you remember that Spider-Man character of yours that we both liked so much? Why don't we do a series about it?"
Spider-Man estava se tornando um grande sucesso, em parte por causa da arte de Steve Ditko, o qual estava trabalhando nas revistas até em 1966.
After a while, he would give me the artwork for a 20-page story. I didn't know what it was, and I would put the dialogue balloons in because Steve told a story so beautifully that you almost didn't need the dialogue.
Antes de tudo, quer dizer, antes da picada da aranha, a vida de Peter Parker era uma bagunça. E depois de ganhar os seus poderes, a sua vida era uma bagunça ainda maior. Todo jovem leitor poderia se identificar com isso.
It's not about that red and blue suit. It's about Peter Parker, the sick aunt, the girl problems, the school problems, the work problem. It's not just a suit jumping off the building. There's somebody inside of that suit that you care about.
Os personagens da DC se comportavam como os pais dos leitores, mas os da Marvel se pareciam mais com os próprios leitores. Em certo ponto, isso era verdade, desde a época dos anos 40.
At that time, the worldview presented in DC comic books was a much simpler, easier to understand kind of worldview. Superman was good, Lex Luthor was evil. As I got older and, more sophisticated, 10, 11, then I started to look for greater degrees of ambiguity in my characters, and that meant that it was time to graduate to Marvel Comics.
DC was the old establishment company. Marvel was the upstart that led people to believe there was a rivalry, and there became a rivalry when Marvel started out selling DC. Then it became very real in terms of, good old bottom line.
Finalizamos! Só não esqueça aqui mesmo no próximo bloco que iremos mostrar cenas que irá acontecer no próximo programa. Não esqueça do joinha e se inscrever no canal. Thanks so much, I really appreciate that. Jesus é contigo, variante meta irmão. Estamos juntos, todos, sempre.